Chapter 1383. This was one of the important instructions Yang Chendong gave to the army. When they faced a strong enemy, they were not to be easily moved by them. They would fight their own battles, and they would fight their own battles. They were not to change because of the enemy. If that happened, they would be giving up on their advantage and letting the enemy take advantage of them. In truth, this was often the treasure that decided the outcome of a battle between powerful players. When a weak player ran into a strong player, their rhythm would usually be messed up. In fact, to protect their lives, they would have no choice but to adapt to the enemy's fighting style. In the end, they would only have the strength to fight back and would not be able to attack at all. How could they not lose? On the other hand, if they fought in the style they were most familiar with, even though there was a high chance that they would lose, they could at least threaten the enemy. If they were lucky, it was not impossible for them to heavily injure the enemy and turn defeat into victory. As the strongest army among cold weapons and the world's best cavalier army that had just been expanded into an army, Commander Tian who would often use Yang Chendong's words to teach his soldiers. Along with the fact that they were stronger than the enemy to begin with and the morale they gained after winning, the moment both sides clashed, Akmu was shocked to find that he was about to lose. In terms of strength, the five-star army waited patiently, and the Mongolian cavaliers who were attacking could not compare to them. In terms of weapons, the soldiers of the world's best cavalier army were all equipped with divine sabers, and their advantage was clear. As long as the enemy dared to fight against them head-on, they would be cut in half after 3 slashes, and they would not be able to continue fighting. In terms of morale, the Mongolian cavaliers had just suffered a great defeat, and all the soldiers were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow. On the other hand, the five-star army had just obtained a great victory, and everyone's confidence was high. This made them even more decisive when they attacked, and the gap between them and the enemy increased by a large margin. When comparing them, the difference in strength was obvious. It could be said that before the battle even started, the victor had already been decided. A tiger had entered a pack of wolves, and it was not just one tiger, but a tiger that had more people than a pack of wolves. The pressure it brought to the Mongolian cavaliers could be easily seen. After fighting for around 15 minutes, Akmu was shocked to find that he could not even use half of the strength he had before. The number of casualties continued to increase, especially as the number of times they clashed increased. Many of the sabers in the Mongolian cavaliers' hands were cut in half, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of weapons. The speed at which they lost became even faster. Protect the general and open up a bloody path. Around a dozen of his remaining personal guards protected Akim. When they saw that the Mongolian cavaliers were about to leave, these personal guards shouted in unison and gathered together to charge out of the corner surrounded by the five-star army. "Let me do it!" A warhorse suddenly rushed out from Yang Chendong's side. Needless to say, that tall figure and that deafening voice belonged to none other than Beta Persei. Speaking of which, Beta Persei also had the courage of 1,000 men. He had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years and could receive pointers at any time. When it came to individual combat power, even in the five-star army, there were few who could match him. Usually, he had to protect the safety of the 6th young master, so he did not have many chances to go to the battlefield. Now that the situation was set, he was itching to fight. When he saw that there were a dozen enemy cavaliers who wanted to escape, he did not hold back and immediately rode his horse away. The dozen Mongolian cavaliers were unusually fierce as they protected Akim and destroyed the path that the five-star army had blocked. They formed a large force and charged out of the battlefield. To be able to become Akim's personal guards, their skills were naturally not bad. Although they did not create the 18 shadow guards or the 12 protectors, they were all strong men who could fight against 10 or even dozens of people. If they gathered their strength together, normal five-star army soldiers would not be able to block them. This could be seen from the fact that they had only lost 4 people even though they had injured more than a dozen five-star army cavaliers along the way. And just when they had already charged through a few blockade lines and were about to break out of the encirclement and escape, a war horse and a tall figure blocked their path. Without any warning, the person rushed in front of them and raised his saber to slash down. Waves of great force crashed into the sabers of the Mongolian personal guards, and a great pressure came from their arms. Cling cling clang clang, clang 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 clang. It was as if he had entered a realm where no one could stop him. Block, block, chop, lift, sweep, press. All sorts of attacks were displayed by Yang Er on horseback. His movements were quick and steady, and he suppressed the Mongolian cavaliers who seemed to be unstoppable a moment ago to the point that they were forced to retreat. Fall! The saber slashed down fiercely and hit the chest of a Mongolian cavalier. The great force caused the cavalier's saber to break, and the blade was also wedged into the cavalier's sternum. The cavalier fell off his horse. "Get down from your horses." Once the saber was pulled out from the chest of a Mongolian cavalier, it was raised and flicked, and it hit another Mongolian cavalier who was charging at him. After the saber sliced through the cavalier's arm, another Mongolian cavalier cried out in pain and fell off his horse. Get down, all of you." The man and horse quickly weaved through the Mongolian cavaliers. His saber was like a nimble snake, and the Mongolian cavaliers around him were either cut down, flicked, or pressed down from their horses. No one was able to withstand a single blow from him. Sixth young master, second brother's strength has increased again. When the captain of the first team, Chov, saw this scene, he could not help but sigh in amazement. At the same time, he was eager to give it a try. Even though he could not compare to Beta Persei's position in Yang Chendong's eyes, because he was close to him, he had received a lot of pointers. He really wanted to go up and see how strong he was. Beta Persei is a person who is willing to work hard. Let's see. These people might not be enough for him to kill alone. Yang Chendong's gaze was like a torch, and he spoke with the gaze of a grandmaster. As the saying went, once an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Even though Beta Persei's strength was much weaker than his, normal Mongolian cavaliers could no longer stop him. Since Yang Chendong had said this, Chov could only suppress the thought of going up to help Beta Persei. Then, he stared at the battlefield with his eyes wide open. He wanted to learn how Beta Persei fought. Many times, watching a battle between experts was also an experience of enlightenment, and it was also a rare opportunity. In the battlefield, Beta Persei killed more than 10 Mongolian cavaliers in a short period of time, and finally faced off against General Akhmu. As the great general of Siberia, Khan Hurahan, Akhmu did not rely on flattery to get to his position. He was a person with real instincts. Before he met the 5-star army. No. It should be said that before he fell into the trap tonight, Akhmu was very arrogant. In his eyes, the Han people were as weak as sheep. They were not even as weak as the Russians who dared to resist them from time to time. Since the 5-star army was mainly made up of Han people, there was no such thing as being strong or powerful. As long as he arrived with the army, one charge would be enough to scare the opponent. Then, it would be the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, and the pursuit of the enemy would be a great victory. It was precisely because he thought that everything was too simple and too easy. When he found out that he was surrounded, Akhmu was shocked. He finally knew that the Han people he faced this time were different from the Han people in the past. They had some ability. However, this ability was nothing more than relying on schemes and trickery to win. If it was face to face, blade to blade, he was confident that he would be able to beat the crap out of these Han people. As a result, there was the scene of him leading the army to counterattack. Then, the confidence in his heart was thrown away one by one. What did they mean that he accidentally fell into a trap? What did they mean that the Han people were weak and easy to bully? Right now, Akhmu only wanted to kill all those who had spread the news. If the Han people were easy to bully, then who was the one who beat him up? After failing time and time again, breaking through the bottom line of his heart, Akhmu no longer had the heart to fight against the 5-star army. This was because he found that even if there were no schemes or traps, he would not be able to gain any advantage against the 5-star army. The only difference was that the other party would have to pay a higher price. However, the result of the battle could not be changed. He would definitely lose and the Han people would win. If he could escape this time, Akhmu would definitely tell Great Khan Hulahan to retreat as far away as possible from the 5-star army. The Han people were simply devils, executioners who killed without batting an eyelid. On the contrary, they were like clowns who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They were so ignorant, so arrogant, and so reckless. However, it was clearly too late for him to think of all this at this time. At this time, Akhmu was already a little scared. If it was possible, if he was not a great general, perhaps he would choose to surrender in order to survive. However, at this time, he had no other choice. With the trust and support that Hulahan had given him over the years, even if he had to fight to the death, he would not say a word about surrendering. Young Heir's chest heaved up and down as he went on a killing spree. After all, he had killed and injured more than a dozen people, so his physical strength was somewhat depleted. Even so, when facing Akhmu, He was still full of pride and said, "Seeing that you are still a general, I will give you a chance. If you don't want to die, surrender." Different from the cloth armor that the other Mongolian cavalry wore, Akhmu wore metal armor. Moreover, it was not the half-metal armor that normal soldiers wore. Instead, it was a full metal armor that protected his body. Just based on this, his identity should not be simple. Beta Persei wanted to capture this person alive. It would be a great achievement. Looking at Beta Persei, Akhmu quickly shook his head. "You are very strong, but this general will never surrender. My soul has long returned to Tungri. Even if you kill me now, it will not be long before I will be a hero again." "Tungri my ass," Beta Persei muttered. He had long known from young Chendong that the so-called Tungri was like the god that the Han people talked about. It was a kind of belief and a kind of spiritual support. It did not exist at all. Of course, he also knew that many Mongolians respected Tungri. If anyone said anything bad about them, they would immediately become the public enemy. He would not do such a stupid thing. Chapter 1384. Beta Persei's eyes became brighter as he cursed Akhmu's ignorance in his heart. "Since he won't surrender, then I'll just kill him. I hope he's not too weak so I can fight to my heart's content." Slowly raising his sword and arm, Beta Persei assumed a posture of a life-and-death battle. Similarly, Akhmu also raised his saber and raised it high up in the air. When their eyes met, the word "kill" came out of their mouths almost at the same time. Then the war horses under both sides let out a neigh, and the two men quickly approached each other. One was the great general of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. He held a high position, was unusually brave, and had experienced hundreds of battles. The other was the leader of the five-star army. He was a close subordinate of Xianxia's leader, Yang Chendong. He had extraordinary strength and the power of his sword was mighty. The so-called strongest of the strongest referred to them. In the process of rushing, when the war horses crossed, the two sabers quickly collided and separated in an instant. In the first round they were evenly matched and it looked like they were evenly matched. After galloping for a distance, the two men turned their horses around and stared at each other. After the exchange, the two men didn't seem any different from before. But if one looked carefully, they could still see the differences. For example, Beta Persei's indifferent face, the tension in Akhmu's eyes, and his slightly trembling right arm. With the advantage of the weapon, Yang Air, who was holding the heavenly saber, could release all of his strength to the maximum when fighting. He didn't have to worry about the weapon breaking down. In contrast, Akhmu couldn't do the same. After seeing the scene of many soldiers' weapons being broken, he was afraid of the five-star army's sabers. This made him not dare to use all his strength in the fight because he wasn't sure if the saber in his hand was strong enough to break in two. The fear in his heart and the inability to use all his strength weakened his momentum and confidence by at least 30%. In a battle between experts, a small mistake could be fatal. Who would dare to not use their full strength? It could be said that with the advantage of the toughness of the weapon, Beta Persei had already gained the upper hand before the battle even began. The tremendous force behind the blow had already caused Akhmu's arm to feel sore and numb, showing signs of defeat. "Ha ha ha, you and I had a fair fight. How delightful. Again." Beta Persei laughed heartily as he felt the exhilaration of releasing his power. After a loud shout, he urged his horse forward. "Fair my ass." Akhmu cursed in his heart. Due to the disadvantage of his weapon, he didn't dare to use his full strength. Naturally, he couldn't display his full strength. Now that he saw Beta Persei rushing over again, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and charge forward. Ding ding dang dang dang. After another clash, Beta Persei laughed again and launched another charge, forcing Akhmu to passively attack again and again. In just a short while, the two sides had clashed for at least 10 rounds. Finally, the saber in Akhmu's hand broke into two. Although the quality of the weapon in his hand was extraordinary as a supreme general, there was still a huge gap between his weapon and Xianxia's more mature forging skills. It was already very difficult for him to hold on until now. Not only that, because he didn't dare to use his full strength, Akhmu had been enduring the tremendous force from Beta Persei on his wrist. At this time, his right arm had become red and swollen, and it was difficult for him to even lift the saber. "Hey! Why did your saber break by itself? Are you afraid of your grandfather?" Well, if that's the case, why don't you surrender? You seem to have some ability. If you surrender, your grandfather will spare your life. How about it? Beta Persei seemed to have just noticed the other party's broken saber and said jokingly. Akmu's face was flushed red. He was furious and infuriated. After so many years of fighting, this was the first time he heard that a saber could be afraid of people. Knowing that Beta Persei was humiliating him, Akmu glared at him and said, "If you want to fight, then fight. You're a vile person with a sharp tongue. Humph. You're courting death." Seeing that Akmu still had no intention of surrendering, Beta Persei was also enraged. After a roar, he urged his horse to charge again. This time, he wouldn't hold back and vowed to cut down his opponent. Beta Persei wasn't worried about whether or not he could kill Akmu. Since the young master didn't say anything to stop him, it wouldn't be a problem to kill this person. Since that was the case, he didn't have any worries and just focused on fighting with all his might. Akmu held half of the saber in his hand and his expression was ugly. But he didn't have the slightest intention of surrendering. A general had died in 100 battles. Since he had won the war, he had to be prepared to die. He only hated himself for being careless this time. Not only did he not have long to live, but he also implicated nearly 10,000 soldiers to die here. In the end, he still failed to live up to the Khan's trust. Akmu, who already had the intention to die, didn't have any more worries. The worst outcome was nothing more than death. How could a person who wasn't even afraid of death be afraid of Beta Persei's saber? Akmu, who was holding half of the saber in his hand, charged forward without any intention of dodging. He launched the last attack of his life. Beta Persei finally felt that something was wrong. As the distance between the two sides got closer and closer, the other party didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. There was only an indomitable momentum and an attitude of mutual destruction. Beta Persei, who didn't want to die with Akmu, had no choice but to change the direction of his saber midway. The saber also changed from a slash to a sweep and fiercely slapped Akmu's body. The powerful saber slapped Akmu's chest and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Even a tree branch could exert a great amount of power, let alone a saber. Blood gushed out of Akmu's mouth as he was struck. Akmu forcefully gathered his strength and swept his saber across Xianxia's black armor, leaving a mark on it. But it was only a shallow mark. The attack range of the broken saber was limited, which allowed Beta Persei to escape. After noticing the saber mark on the armor, Beta Persei first took a deep breath. He didn't dare to imagine what the result would be if the other party didn't use a broken saber, but a whole saber. In other words, he was almost injured by the other party. If he wanted to kill his own people, he had to kill them first. Beta Persei would not allow a defeated general to threaten him. After shouting angrily, he raised his saber and slashed back. This slash used almost 90% of his strength. Akmu, who had just swung his saber and used up all his strength, had a regretful expression on his face. He was so close to beheading the general of the 5-star army. Just as he was feeling regretful, he felt a cold wind coming from above his head. When he raised his head again, a sharp saber was falling towards his head. It was already dark. Although there were torches around, it was still difficult to see. Akmu only saw the shadow of a saber flash above his head, and then an indescribable pain attacked his whole body. After struggling for a while, Akmu's chest suddenly split open and blood gushed out. Then, he lowered his head and saw that his body had been split in half. Akmu's nose twitched as he could no longer breathe in oxygen. His body trembled a few times before he fell off the horse and onto the ground, forever losing his consciousness and senses. Whew! Beta Persei, who had killed Akmu, let out a long sigh. Reality told him that if he underestimated any opponent, he would have to pay a heavy price. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party was holding a broken blade, the one who would be lying on the ground right now would be him. With Akmu killed, the other Mongol soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were either killed or surrendered. Before the sun rose, the battle had already ended. Of the 8,000 Mongol cavalry that charged into the ambush, not a single one managed to escape. The battle on the main battlefield had already ended. Outside the Amuga River, the battle was still ongoing. When the 2,000 Mongol cavalry saw that the main force of the army had fallen into the 5-star army's trap, they turned around and fled. The previous scene had already told them that tonight's ambush had failed. It was not difficult for the 8,000 Mongol cavalry to not be able to escape. Since they had already lost, it was impossible for them to turn the situation around with just 2,000 people. Rather than continuing to die, they might as well escape and report this matter to the Khan. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry retreated. However, before they could run 5 miles, Nanliti brought a Hachi, who had come to report, and a group of cavalry to welcome them. While they were still far away, Nanliti's voice rang out first. "Are the people in front our brothers? We are here to support you." Before the battle had even started, a Hachi had been released by Akmu so that he could find Nanliti and ask him to send troops together. He had purposely notified them a little later so that Akmu would not steal the credit from him. However, what he did not expect was that what awaited him was not credit but death. Of course, even if Akmu had notified Nanliti in advance, he would have found all sorts of reasons to delay. The one in control of the army was not him, but Ba Dao Jiang and the 1st Division commander Taimu Er. They led 4,000 troops and waited here for the chance to deal the final blow to the Mongol cavalry. When the flames in the camp soared into the sky, the 4,000 cavalry finally moved. They galloped all the way and killed any fish that fell into the net. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry that had escaped were unfortunately stopped by them. After losing contact with their commander, the 2,000 Mongol cavalry were defeated by a wave of 5-star army. The cavalry fled in all directions and rushed into the surrounding forest. With Tian Yi and Lin Duo, even 40,000 cavalrymen would not be able to surround the entire area, let alone 4,000 cavalrymen. Ba Dao Jiang and Taimu could only watch as the scattered Mongolian soldiers escaped. They focused their attention on the main force of the Mongolian cavalry. Compared to the main battlefield, the battle on this side of the battlefield had already ended a step earlier. The final tally was that they had captured and killed around 1,600 cavalry. This meant that at least 400 Mongol cavalry had escaped during the night. When they reported this to Yang Chendong, he was not surprised. He only said, "The army should use the time to clean up the battlefield and rest. Tomorrow afternoon, we will set off for Arching." Since they had already revealed their tracks and displayed their strength, in order to prevent Hurahan from escaping with the army, they had to speed up their march. Even so, Yang Chendong did not have the confidence to kill all the enemies. This was caused by the environment. The Far East region was filled with forests, lakes, and mountains. If someone wanted to hide in such an area, finding them would be as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. Chapter 1385. Arching City. 3 days later, when Khagan Hulahan was still waiting for good news from General Akmu, an unexpected piece of news was delivered to him. When the cavalry who had escaped from the front lines knelt down in front of him and described the situation at the front lines, Hulahan felt the sky darken and he almost fainted. Akmu had actually been defeated. Not only that, but his own life and death were unknown. Of the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry under him, less than 400 had returned. This result was completely out of Hulahan's expectations. Since the 5-star army only had 10,000 people, even if they could not win, they should be able to retreat safely. They were the Mongolian cavalry, a race that had grown up on horseback. Compared to the Hans who were not good at riding, they had a natural advantage. In fact, many times on the battlefield, they looked down on their Hans opponents. Hulahan fainted. His subordinates tried to save him, pinching his philtrum and splashing cold water on him, before finally waking him up. After waking up, Hulahan first accepted the fact that they had lost, but he still did not believe that Akmu would be fine. He was very clear about Akmu's abilities, and ordinary people would not be able to catch him. Furthermore, he had a large army, so he believed that he would definitely be able to break out of the encirclement. Just as Hulahan regained his composure, Belinsky walked in from outside the door. He first bowed to Hulahan and then asked with concern, "I heard that the Great Khan is not feeling well." "I have already found the best doctor in the city. They are waiting outside the residence and can examine the Great Khan at any time." "No need, this Khan's body is very good." Hulahan waved his hand. He did not trust the Han's doctors, not to mention that he was not sick. He had only fainted because he was too anxious. However, no matter what, Belinsky had good intentions. This time, they were able to take down Arching City because of him. A look of hesitation flashed across Hulahan's face, but he quickly said with determination, "Let me tell you something. General Akmu fell into the Han's trap and lost the battle. What? Belinsky's expression changed when he heard this. He was indeed unaware of this news. After all, news of Akmu's death had only just reached the city. This news caused Belinsky's expression to change drastically. At the same time he asked suspiciously, "Great Khan, is this true? Was this news personally sent by General Akmu? But where is the general now?" The news didn't come from Akmu. It came from the cavalry he brought with him. Don't worry, this news is reliable. The battle is definitely won. As for Akmu's whereabouts, even I don't know. While shaking his head, Houlihan angrily slammed the table and said, "The 5-star army has gone too far. They actually dared to set a trap for me. They are truly despicable. This enmity must be avenged." Houlihan did have a reason to be angry. No one would be in a good mood after being taught a lesson by someone they had always looked down on. But why didn't he think about it? If he hadn't targeted the Far Eastern Army first, how could the 5-star army find trouble with them so quickly? Houlihan was still sulking. Belinsky indeed wouldn't. Although he was a merchant, it was because of this that he placed benefits and safety more than anyone else. The Mongol cavalry was known as a race on horseback. They had always been the ones to kill. When had they ever been killed or lost a battle? At the very least, from what he knew, when the Russian tribes faced the Mongol cavalry, they had mostly lost. The 5-star army was actually so powerful that they could defeat the elite Mongol cavalry. Didn't that mean they were even more powerful? He had actually offended such a powerful person. Didn't that mean he was no longer safe? No, I have to leave. I have to leave the 5-star army. In this chaotic world, Belinsky, who had always viewed his life as the most important, quickly made a decision. In order to leave this place safely, he had to ask Houlihan to bring him along. Otherwise, whether it was in the Far East or in the Siberian region, he would not have a foothold in the future. Belinsky, who had made up his mind, looked at Houlihan and organized his words before saying, "Great Khan, the 5-star army is so powerful. We shouldn't fight them head-on." What? Do you really think this Khan is afraid of them? This time, they only defeated Akmu because they schemed. Even if they can win, they must have suffered heavy losses. Now, this Khan still has more than 15,000 elite cavalry. This Khan is still confident that we can defeat them. Houlihan wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Although his bloodline wasn't pure and he couldn't be considered a member of the Golden family, he was still a descendant of Genghis Khan. He was still very proud in his bones. Seeing that Houlihan was still so stubborn, Belinsky scolded him for being stupid in his heart. On the surface, he had to put on a serious expression and said, "The Great Khan's might is naturally not something that the Han people can match. However, the problem now is that not only do we have the 5-star army as our enemy, we also have the Far Eastern army behind us. Previously, we were unprepared and caught them off guard, so they had no choice but to hide. However, now that their reinforcements are here, they will definitely jump out and become enemies with the Great Khan. When that time comes, the Great Khan won't have any advantage in terms of military strength. Even if we can win in the end, the Great Khan's strength will also be heavily injured. In that case, if other forces enter this place, what will we use to defend against them?" This. Houlihan wanted to say that as long as he was here, they wouldn't be defeated by the 5-star army. However, after considering that if they really won an Pyrrhic victory, once their strength was severely damaged, it was inevitable that there would be despicable people who would target them. There were no laws here, nor was there any so-called justice. Everything was based on the law of the jungle where the strong preyed on the weak. If they didn't have enough strength, then they deserved to be bullied. Houlihan wouldn't watch his strength be damaged and be looked down upon by others. If that was the case, what was the use of occupying Arching? Thinking of this, his thoughts of fighting to the death with the 5-star army couldn't help but waver. Seeing that Houlihan didn't say anything, Belinsky knew that his suggestion was effective. He immediately followed up, "Great Khan, the Han people have a saying, where there is life, there is hope. As long as the Great Khan is still here, this one is still here. If you and I work together, I will provide the money and you will provide the manpower. The Han people also have a saying, it's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. Today the 5-star army made us suffer. Let's remember this first. We will get our revenge sooner or later." As Belinsky consoled him, he also repeated his own importance. In the end, he was telling Houlihan that he was very important and that he had to bring him along when he left. Houlihan, who didn't think too much, didn't know what Belinsky was thinking. He was only considering whether Belinsky's words were correct. Just like how Belinsky valued his own life, Belinsky naturally didn't want to die. Not only that, he also valued his own strength. Since he was young, he had seen too many unfair things. He also respected the truth, which was that the one with the biggest fist was the absolute truth. As long as you had enough strength, you could set the rules. On the other hand, if you were weak, even if what you said was correct, no one would listen to you. He thought about how he wasn't the only armed force in Siberia, and he wasn't even the only great Khan. If his strength was weakened too much, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have a place to stay when he returned this time. Since he wasn't confident that he could win, and there wouldn't be enough benefits even if he won, why would he fight this battle? Instead of taking the risk, it was better to retreat first. Just like what Belinsky said, he should preserve his strength first. Revenge could wait until he was stronger, right? Okay. After thinking it through, Houlihan slapped his thigh and said, "You're right, we don't have to fight to the death with the 5-star army. Since that's the case, why don't we retreat first? How about this? This Khan will immediately order the army to prepare to leave. When the time comes, we won't leave anything behind for the 5-star army. This Khan wants to leave them a mess and give them a headache." Belinsky heaved a sigh of relief when Houlihan finally thought it through. However, when he heard that Houlihan wanted to openly retreat, he stopped him and said, "Great Khan, you can't do that. If we leave now, we will definitely leak the news. What if the 5-star army and the Far Eastern army join forces and chase after us? What do you think we should do?" Arhan didn't think about this problem and was a bit stunned when he was asked this. If we leave, then we leave. In the past, when we retreated from a place, it was always like this. With a big order, the army would move out and grab everything that they could see and use. Why did they have to do something so complicated this time? Arhan was confused, so Belinsky knew that he had to explain some things to him. "Great Khan, the current situation is like this. We just lost to the 5-star army. Once the news leaks out, the morale of the army will definitely fall. If the hidden Far Eastern army also knows about this, they will take advantage of the situation and come out. What can we do? If they join forces with the 5-star army and attack us from two sides, even if we can leave, we will have to pay a price. Even if we leave, we can only leave quietly. Before we leave, we can also remove some unstable factors in the army." Unstable factors. Houlihan didn't understand what the other party was talking about. Chapter 1386. Belinsky sighed in his heart. This Houlihan might be good at fighting and killing, but when it came to scheming and plotting, he was a far cry from that. It was probably because there was no one else in the Mongolian army that he was able to get the position. "Great Khan, Tang Shang is a surrendered general, but he has not truly joined us. Before, it was only because we captured his tribesmen and forced him to join us. Now that he's with his clansmen, no one knows if he'll really listen to us. People like him are unstable elements in the army. Since that's the case, why don't we leave him here and let him lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern army? Isn't that killing two birds with one stone? After he leaves, our army will leave the city. At that time, it will be the Han people's problem. If they want to kill each other, we can just kill them. There will be no losses for us. What do you think, Great Khan?" After finally speaking his thoughts, Belinsky looked into Houlihan's eyes with anticipation. "HM? That makes sense." Houlihan took a while to digest these words, then nodded his head heavily. He was a selfish person and would not easily trust others. In his eyes, the remaining 15,000 Mongol cavalry were the most loyal. Even Belinsky could be abandoned at any time, let alone Tang Shang. If it was not for the fact that Tang Shang still held the authority of the 2nd Cavalry Division, he would not even look at him. Now that he could leave safely by abandoning Tang Shang, it was definitely worth it. He nodded and said, "That's fine. I'll leave this matter to you. The sooner, the better." "Yes." Belinsky nodded heavily. Although he was not willing to do such a thing, if he left it to Houlihan, it could easily cause problems. For his own safety and the safety of his assets, he had to do it personally. After leaving the Great Khan's residence, Belinsky went straight to Tang Shang's residence. Ever since his clansmen had been found and sent to all city, Tang Sheng had arranged for them to stay in his courtyard. Along with some of his personal guards, although the courtyard was not big, there were quite a few people. There were close to 500 people. When Belinsky arrived, he felt that it was very lively. When Belinsky arrived, Tang Sheng, who had received the news, immediately came to welcome him. The two of them went to the study and asked everyone to leave. When Tang Sheng saw Belinsky's cautious expression, he had a bad feeling. Until the other party spoke, he knew that his premonition was not wrong. "General Tang, a great disaster is about to befall you," Belinsky said with a long sigh, as if he was very concerned about Tang Sheng. "Why?" Tang Sheng was so shocked that he stood up from his chair with a look of horror on his face. Ever since he rebelled against the Far Eastern Army, Tang Sheng hadn't had a good night's sleep. As a trader, especially before his old master was killed, he needed to be on guard against revenge and all kinds of methods that could be used against him. Especially in the past few days, the entire All City had been in chaos. The people living here, whether it was their personal safety or their property, were greatly threatened. Facing the Mongol cavalry who only knew how to plunder and didn't know how to manage and produce, the people were already complaining and dissatisfied. Sometimes, even he would feel angry when he saw the Mongol cavalry's actions. They were simply a group of bandits who didn't talk reason and only did things based on their emotions. They didn't care about the people's feelings at all. However, because they had cavalry swords in their hands that could kill, the people didn't dare to say anything. Because of this, many people vented their anger on him. Even though he also held a certain amount of military power, the people weren't bold enough to attack his residence, and no one dared to truly make a move against him. However, when he walked on the streets, he could still feel the unconcealed anger of the people when they looked at him with gazes. He had offended the Far Eastern Army, offended the people in the city, and the 5-star army had sent reinforcements. It would be strange if Tang Sheng was in a good mood. As a result, there were many times when he began to doubt whether his actions back then were right or wrong. For the sake of his less than 200 clansmen, he had betrayed the interests of tens of thousands of Far East soldiers and hundreds of thousands of people. Did he do something wrong? While he was reflecting on himself, Tang Sheng was also very afraid of death. He was afraid that some people who couldn't touch the Mongol cavalry would target him. Therefore, when he went out, he doubled the number of guards. Even when he slept at home, he arranged many guards outside to protect him. However, even so, he was still unable to sleep until dawn. Often, the slightest movement would wake him up. Now that Belinsky had come and said that he was in trouble, how could he not be afraid? "Mr. Tang, what's going on? Back then, I listened to you and rebelled against the Far Eastern Army. Now you can't leave me alone." Tang Sheng suddenly grabbed Belinsky's arm and said with a pleading expression, "Don't be agitated, don't be agitated." Belinsky was in a good mood. Originally, he thought that it would take some effort to scare Tang Sheng. But now, it seemed that he was simply a bird that was startled by the twang of a bow, so the following things would be much easier. After patting Tang Sheng's arm and making a comforting gesture, Belinsky frowned. After thinking for a while, he said to Tang Sheng, who was listening seriously, "General Tang, I'm sure you can tell that the Khan is a suspicious person. He doesn't really trust you, right?" "Yes." Tang Sheng nodded. Half of his blood was Han Chinese. Just based on this, it would be extremely difficult to make Hulahan trust him. "Yes, the Khan is somewhat suspicious of you." Previously, someone went to the Khan and complained to him, saying that you only surrendered to the Khan on the surface, but secretly had other thoughts and that you were still in contact with the Far Eastern Army. "No, absolutely not." Tang Sheng, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again with a thump. His face was red. This time he was really anxious. The feeling of being wronged was not good. He would never admit to something he did not do. "Don't worry, your subordinate will speak. Your subordinate will speak." Belinsky comforted him again, then said, "I absolutely trust the general. You have already stabbed the Far Eastern Army. How could you still be in contact with them? I also went to the Khan about this matter and told him that you are innocent." Thank you, thank you." Tang Sheng wiped the sweat on his forehead and said gratefully, "Don't thank me. In fact, this matter is not over. I only temporarily dispelled the Khan's suspicion of you. If you want the Khan to completely believe you, you still need to do something." Belinsky began to lead the topic to the trap. Sure enough, when he heard that there was a solution, Tang Xing asked with a face full of curiosity, "Please teach me, Mr. Tang." "I can't say that I'll teach you, but if the general can lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army, wouldn't that be the best way to prove yourself? At that time, once you can capture the Far Eastern Army's commander, or even severely injure the Far Eastern Army, who would dare to doubt you? At that time, not only will the Khan completely trust you, it is also possible that he will give you great power." When he heard that he had to become enemies with the Far Eastern Army, Tang Xing's face immediately turned ugly. When Belinsky instigated him to rebel, he said that it would be best if he could capture Chen Bo. If he couldn't, he only needed to open the gates of Arching. In the future, he wouldn't need to do anything to deal with the Far Eastern Army. But now, it was a different story. Tang Sheng wanted to remind the other party of the promise he made to him. But after thinking about it, what was the point of saying it? Right now, Hulahan didn't trust him. If he didn't quickly solve this problem, who knew when the Mongolian cavalry would visit his home? If that happened, would he and his clansmen still have a way to live? There was no choice. It wasn't a matter of whether he was willing or not, but he had to do it. Otherwise, a disaster would be right in front of him. Phew. Tang Sheng exhaled. His face didn't look good, but there were still some things that needed to be said and some promises that needed to be made. "Mr. Tang, since doing this can eliminate the Khan's suspicion of me, I will lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army." Belinsky was very happy that Tang Sheng agreed so easily. But in order to make sure that the other party didn't do nothing, he continued to promise, "That's good. If that's the case, no one will be able to slander the general. That's right, the general only needs to lead the troops. I will ask the Khan to send troops to help you. When the time comes, we will deal with the Far Eastern Army and have done a great service. I hope the general won't forget my contribution." Of course. Tang Shang was relieved when he heard that the Mongolian cavalry would help him. He had hidden many spies in the Far Eastern Army. Those people were like him, not pure Han people. They wouldn't be loyal to the Far Eastern Army. With these spies and the help of the 2nd Cavalry Division and the Mongolian soldiers, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with the Far Eastern Army that had already been discovered. Tang Sheng agreed and personally sent Belinsky out of the residence with a look of gratitude. At the same time, he promised that he would gather the troops now and leave the city tomorrow morning to find the Far Eastern Army. Good news would come soon. Tang Sheng didn't know that he had been completely used by Belinsky and abandoned by Hulahan. He had become an abandoned pawn and had to cover for the Mongolian army's departure. It could be said that he had made the best use of everything. Chapter 1387. Belinsky happily went to see Hulahan. First, he explained Tang Sheng's attitude. Then, he suggested that the moment Tang Sheng left the city the next day, they would seal the city and loot the entire city. They would take everything that could be used or taken away and quickly leave this place. They would return to Siberia to recuperate and prepare for the next battle. Hulahan happily accepted Belinsky's suggestion. However, at the same time, he was also alarmed. This merchant was too cunning, so much so that he had to be wary. He even wondered if he could kill this merchant if he had the chance. When the time came, he would be able to obtain the merchant's wealth and avoid a huge danger. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Unfortunately, Belinsky did not know this. He was still fantasizing about how he could expand his caravan in Siberia with Hulahan's support. He even thought that without Akmu, Hulahan would be in urgent need of talents. He should have the ability to take over this position. This was the difference between a merchant and a ruthless person. Merchants thought more about benefits and how to make use of each other in a win-win situation. Ruthless people were different. They mostly did things based on their hearts. Once they realized that there was danger, they would kill without any reason. As for the consequences, that was something to be discussed in the future. As for Tang Sheng, after receiving Belinsky's reminder, he began to gather his troops that afternoon. After bringing enough rations for 5 days, he bade farewell to his clansmen early the next morning and led his troops out of Arching. Not long after he left the city gates were closed. At the same time, they began to loot. In order not to attract attention, there was no fire in the city. Everything that could be looted was looted, and those that could not be taken away were smashed. For a time, the city was in a mess. Even General Tang Sheng's residence did not escape.
Belinsky personally led the army to charge in, and then there was a round of looting.
Tang Sheng was a division commander. When he chased Chen Bo and the others away, he took a lot of good things. Now they were all in the treasury. Now Belinsky had benefited from them.
When they saw the boxes of good things being carried out of the Tang residence, the clansmen who stayed behind to guard the residence could not take it anymore.
They all went forward to stop these actions. This made Belinsky unhappy.
Since he had decided to go all the way, he gave the order and the Mongol cavalry began to kill.
Very quickly, the Tang manor was filled with blood and the stench of blood filled the air.
Even after all of the clansmen had died, many of them still had their eyes wide open, as if they had died with a grievance.
They really couldn't imagine that the person who came to the residence yesterday and was sent away by Tang Sheng with endless gratitude would suddenly reveal killing intent today and kill all of them. What exactly was going on? The chaos in all city also affected the intelligence personnel of the 5-star army in the city.
However, because some of them were dressed like beggars and had no money, they did not attract the attention of the Mongolian soldiers.
When the situation in the city became more and more chaotic, the intelligence personnel used a new battery that had just been sent into the city to turn on the radio and broadcast the situation outside. At this moment, Yang Chendong was leading his army towards Arching. At this time, the number of troops had reached nearly 20,000. Apart from the 10,000 soldiers, there were also many Mongol captives as well as many Russian clansmen nearby. 3 battles, 3 victories, and Yang Chendong used his actions to prove the strength of the 5-star army. He also attracted the respect of some hot-blooded Russians like Nikolaev. They had even expressed their desire to join the 5-star army. Once they entered Arching, they would be able to achieve their wish. This was Yang Chendong. No matter what the situation was, he could always make the troops grow like a snowball. In the end, they would become a colossus that would strike fear into the bones of all his opponents. As the army was advancing, the intelligence report from Arching was sent over. When the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, his first thought was that the enemy was about to run.
Tell Commander Tianhu to come over immediately.
The target had been exposed, so it was time to start a fire. Under the constant cooling, Chen Bo fell into a deep sleep once again. This time, it was different from the past. Chen Bo had really fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, and his body's vital signs were also constantly recovering. It was only a matter of time before his body fully recovered. As for the military matters of the Far Eastern Army, before Chen Bo fell asleep, he gave all the power to Commander Dai Qua. As the person who followed Yang Chendong to the Far East, Dai Qua had seen the strength of the 5-star army. His loyalty to Yang Chendong was not something that the other commanders could compare to. Chen Bo was relieved to give the power to this person. After Dai Qua obtained the military power, the first thing he did was to take out the tiger talisman that Chen Bo gave him.
He sent someone to inform the 3rd Cavalry Division and the 5th Cavalry Division.
He also allowed Commander Kong He to return to the army and lead the 2nd Cavalry Division to gather at the military headquarters. Even if there are unstable elements in the army, it should only be a small part. It is time to expose them.
Commander Dai Qua waved his hand and gave such a military order.
There was nothing to be afraid of if there were pustules in the body. What was scary was that they did not dare to squeeze them out. Doing so would only make the problem worse. Since the 6th young master had already arrived with the army, even if these people jumped out, they would not be able to do anything. What was there to be afraid of? Out of his absolute trust in Yang Chendong, Dai Qua let the army assemble without worry. He wanted to see who would jump out and who would court death. At the same time, he also sent a report to Yang Chendong, informing him that the Far Eastern Army was not very stable and asking for reinforcements. Yang Chendong had thought a lot about the problem of the Far Eastern Army on the way here. Considering that he was entering alone, in order to expand the army, the political review of the source of soldiers was not so strict. As a result, there were all kinds of people mixed in. This was something he could understand. But understanding was not giving in. They ate his food and took his salary, but they wanted to rebel against his master. If he did not punish them well, where would the justice be?
He handed over the task of getting rid of the traitors to Beta Persei, and allocated 1,000 men from the 2nd Battalion of the Black Cavalry and 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Army.
He wanted to deal with the unstable elements in the army with a thunderous force. Since he came to the Far East, a fortress like the first city would definitely be built here. After Beta Persei received the order, he quickly left with the army after Tianhu left. Yang Chendong led the rest of the army straight to Arching. It was already chaotic there. The earlier they arrived, the earlier they could end the chaos there. After Dai Qua received Yang Chendong's reply, he was full of confidence. The stage had been set up, and the next step was to see how those people with bad intentions would act. Tang Sheng brought more than 8,000 men from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division to the military forest where Chanbo was. What made people speechless was that this army was still wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army. This was also a helpless move. Although they surrendered to the Mongolian army with their division commander, the other party was too poor. They were so poor that they did not have any uniform at all. They had no choice but to gather here wearing the old military uniform. Wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army, they were now going to fight the 5-star army. The sarcasm was very obvious. The direct experience was that the morale of the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division was very low. Most of the soldiers' faces flashed with confusion. Not everyone was as ungrateful as Tang Sheng. These soldiers were all from poor families, and many of them were Russian men who had been bullied by the Mongolian cavalry. It was Chen Bo who had built Al City after arriving in the Far Eastern region. He gave them food to eat, so that they would not starve to death and did not have to worry about their safety. Although Chen Bo didn't bring the families of these soldiers to Al City for the sake of the overall stability of the situation, causing them to have a lot of worries in the future. However, their monthly wages were not little, and they were never late. With this money, they could buy some things in the city to support their own tribes. This was already something that made them feel very proud. Many warriors were still thinking that when the boys in their tribes grew up to be men, they would bring them to Al City to join the army, so that they could better support their tribes. However, they did not expect Tang Sheng to betray them. When they received the news, many of the soldiers could not understand, and no one was willing to rebel with him. However, it was at this time that Tang Sheng stood up, saying that once they and the Mongolian army took over Al City, they could bring their tribes into the city and live a good life together. It was because of this that the soldiers were appeased, and they had no choice but to stand together with their enemies, the Mongolian cavalry. Tang Sheng had indeed kept his promise. After successfully chasing Chen Bo out of Al City, he agreed to let the soldiers bring their tribes into the city. However, what no one expected was that the current Arching was no longer the Arching of the past. The city had long since fallen under the control of the Mongol army. The series of measures that General Chen Bo had set for the citizens had all disappeared, and no one followed them. There were many smashing, killing, robbing and pillaging within the city, and sometimes it was even more chaotic than outside. Under such circumstances, who would bring their own tribes into the city? Wouldn't that be like sending sheep into a tiger's den? It was also at this time that Tang Sheng stood up again, saying that the chaos would end soon. As long as the Mongols weren't stupid, Al City would return to peace. Everyone just needed to wait patiently, and Al City would become a true refuge for everyone. In order for this day to come sooner, they needed to eliminate the Far East Army first. They had to get rid of this big problem first. It was under such circumstances that the 4th Cavalry Division left Al City, following Tang Sheng to 50 miles north of the city. They acted as if they were going to attack the Far Eastern Army headquarters. Tang Sheng, who had just arrived, met up with the Mongol commander, Uru, and learned that the Far East Army, which had been hidden for many days, was gathering here. Uru welcomed Tang Sheng's arrival very much. There were only 2,000 Mongolian cavalry here. Although they felt that their fighting strength was not bad, the Far Eastern Army was said to have tens of thousands of soldiers. In terms of numbers, the difference was still too great. Chapter 1388. Tang Sheng's arrival was not just a matter of increasing the number of soldiers by nearly 10,000. This person was once a division commander of the Far East Army, and had many old friends in the army. If this matter was handled well, turning an enemy into a friend, how much help would he gain? General Tang, we will launch the attack tomorrow. When the time comes, both sides will be at the foot of the mountain. I hope that the general can use his glib tongue to gain merit before the battle. At that time, I will truthfully report everything I see to the Khan. Ulu said with a fake smile on his face. He was reminding and also warning Tang Sheng that tomorrow's battle was very important and that he must do his best. Your praise will also be known to the Khan. You must not miss such an opportunity to gain merit. Yes,
This general understands. Tang Shang cupped his fists and said with a very humble attitude. Although the other party was not as good as him in terms of numbers, the other party was a Mongolian general. In comparison, he was far inferior. He had no choice but to flatter the other party. Ulu left the tent, leaving Tang Shang behind to think about some information about the officers of the Far Eastern Army. If he wanted to persuade those people before the battle, he had to do some homework in advance. This battle would also determine his position in Hulahan's heart. He did not dare to be careless in the slightest. Of course, if he knew that Hulahan had already abandoned him and fled, and that his mansion in All City had long been robbed by the people he trusted, Belinsky, and the people he regarded as his life had also been killed, he probably would not have such thoughts now. At the same time, in the headquarters of the Far Eastern Army in the mountains, Dai Qua also contacted Beta Persei's reinforcements who had arrived at the periphery. When he knew that Beta Persei was already outside the mountains with 4,000 cavalry and could appear at any time, Dai Qua's heart was greatly relieved. He also began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. He wanted to see how many disloyal people there were in the army. He could take advantage of this opportunity to take them all down. The night would eventually pass. On the morning of the second day, both armies began to gather outside their respective tents as if they had discussed it beforehand. Both sides had their own thoughts, but with the same goal, they did not fight to the death right from the start. Instead, they arranged themselves in a formation, looking like they wanted to use their power to suppress the other party. The Mongolian army had over 10,000 cavalry. Adding the 3 divisions of the Far Eastern Army and 20,000 cavalry, they had over 30,000 cavalry. Fortunately, the open space under the mountain forest was not small. But even so, from afar, all kinds of flags fluttered high up in the sky and stood in all directions, giving off a boundless and endless feeling. It took nearly 4 hours, starting from dawn until the sun was high in the sky. Finally, the armies of both sides were in formation. Then, it was time for the commanders of each side to take the stage. As for the 5-star army, Chen Bo was still recovering, so he did not appear. The one who replaced him was Dai Qua. This was enough to show his authority from the fact that Chen Bo's guard captain, Xianxia, appeared beside him. Other than Dai Qua, the 2nd Division's commander, Kong He, the 3rd Division's commander, Shi Xiaolin, and the 5th Division's commander Wu Ba, all appeared with their respective cavalry. But what was interesting was that these 3 divisions were not gathered together. They maintained a certain distance between each division, giving off a sense of vigilance. In comparison, the Mongol army only had Tang Shang, Ulu, and a few other generals at the front, and their numbers were much lesser. But the advantage was that they seemed to be united. More importantly, Tang Shang was going to recruit them. This was the most important thing. This was because if this matter was done well, the military strength and morale of both sides would decrease while the other side would increase. It was even possible for there to be a reversal. After both sides were in formation, Tang Shang rode out under General Ulu's signal. In the sudden silence of both camps, this action was too eye-catching no matter how one looked at it. As Tang Shang leaped out of the formation, all kinds of discussions began to spread uncontrollably below. There were very few generals in the Far Eastern Army who did not recognize this 4th Division's commander. Especially this time, the Far Eastern Army had lost Al City, and it was all because of this person. This time, it was difficult to not recognize him. He was just a traitor. No one knew what he wanted to do. Could it be that he wanted to repent after seeing the strength of the Far Eastern Army? A few Far Eastern Army soldiers who did not know the truth thought like this. Only some officers who had other thoughts revealed an indescribable expression in their eyes. It was unknown whether they were happy, hesitant, or hesitant. Before Tang Shang spoke, they probably hadn't made a final decision. Commander Dai, the traitor Tang Shang has come out. Please allow this general to kill him. The head of the guards, Xia Qian, glared at Tang Shang and clenched his fists when he saw him gallop out. His eyes were filled with hatred as he spoke. No rush, no rush. Let's wait and see. On the other hand, Dai Qua was not anxious at all. On the contrary, he was looking forward to the other party's performance. He wanted to see how many loyal generals and villains there were in the Far Eastern Army now. Dai Qua had no intention of stopping him. Even if the other officers wanted to charge and kill the enemy, they had no choice but to suppress their anger. They wanted to see what this Tang Shang had to say. In the eyes of these brave people,
If you did something wrong, you should be punished. Even if Tang Shang said something, they would not easily forgive him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Tang Sheng first swept his gaze over the Far Eastern army. After recognizing many of his colleagues, he finally opened his mouth slowly. Everyone, I don't think I need to introduce myself. Everyone knows me. Yes, I am the traitor in the eyes of some of you. Just like that, Tang Sheng's actions caused another round of discussion to erupt from the two great formations. Everyone was discussing. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually admitted that he was a traitor. Without waiting for the discussion to continue fermenting, Tang Sheng shouted again. But I want to say now, I am not a traitor. I am loyal to my tribe. Half of my blood is Mongol. The reason why I led the Mongol army into Arching was to protect my tribe and continue to reproduce. What's wrong with that? Tang Sheng was almost shouting when he asked, "What's wrong?" After saying this, his face became a little ferocious. Is it wrong to think for my tribe? If that's the case, what's the point of being born? If I can't even protect my own family, how can I be a man? How can I be a man? Hiss. Hearing this, many of the soldiers sucked in a breath of cold air. These words could be said to be heart-wrenching. In ancient times, many soldiers rushed to the battlefield and shouted the slogan to be loyal to the king, to the country. But was this really the case? How many of the so-called loyal people had seen the emperor? How many people had feelings for the so-called country? In the end, soldiers fighting was just a way to make a living. Simply speaking, it was to survive. If there were other purposes, it would be to get promoted and get rich. Therefore, the slogan to be loyal to the king was just a slogan. No one would really think that way. On the contrary, more people did it for the sake of being able to survive in troubled times. There were also some people who were lucky and were promoted from soldiers to officers with some authority. Then their goal would be higher. This was how they filled their own pockets and how they could take advantage of the situation to create more wealth for themselves. In this way, there was the so-called eating empty pay and stealing military supplies. The direct result of this was that the upper echelons of the military wanted to win the war. This was more beneficial to their future promotion and wealth, and even their wives and children. The middle-level officers, especially those young generals who didn't have much room for promotion, thought the opposite. They wanted to win the war. In this way, the matter of them moving public funds would be impossible to investigate, along with the defeat and the death of some people. They could even take advantage of this opportunity to eat more empty pay and get some empty pay. As for the soldiers at the bottom, they were only following orders. If the situation was to their advantage, they would rush up and fight to see if there was a chance to obtain any benefits. On the other hand, once the situation was unfavorable, they would just turn around and run. Staying alive was the most important thing. As for whether or not they won the war, what did it have to do with them? Or rather, there wouldn't be any change in the future. If that was the case, why should they risk their lives? These were some of the true portrayals of the military. Then, could such an army win the war? Without faith, without spiritual support, and without even daring to have hope, could an army expand and unleash their potential? The answer was obviously yes. It was also because of this that Tang Xing didn't feel any shame for his rebellion. On the contrary, he could still speak frankly in front of everyone without a change in expression. This wasn't because he was thick-skinned, but because his thoughts and perspective were different. After Tang Sheng shouted out what was wrong, his gaze swept across the Far Eastern army. Then he began to call out names. Commander Chi Wu, as far as I know, your tribe is also outside of All City. Once winter comes, they have to face the pressure of the wind and snow. May I ask, what can you do for them? If you can't, what's the point of being a commander? Vice Commander Zhang Hai, your situation is the same. Let me ask you, how do you feel at ease? Battalion Commander Li Dei, I heard that 3 of your tribesmen have already frozen to death in the heavy snow this winter. Don't tell me you want to continue with the 4th and 5th? Tang Sheng was calling out names. It wasn't targeted at a specific division. It was completely random. He would call out the name of whoever he saw. There were people in a few divisions who were called out. Chapter 1389. All the officers who were called out lowered their heads, proving that Tang Sheng was right, proving that they were having a complicated struggle in their hearts. These people were the unstable elements in the Far Eastern Army. They were the internal problems that Commander Chen Bo was worried about. After Arching was taken down, he did not immediately launch a counterattack. Instead, he split up the army and hid them. He was afraid that the problem would be too big. Now, after hearing Tang Shang's words, many people had been bewitched to the point that they were ready to make a move. This was especially so for some of the officers who were called out. When they noticed the changes in the gazes of the people around them, they knew that there was no point in hiding anymore. Thus, they decided to stand out and walk towards the Mongolian camp where Tang Shang was. Some of them did not only bring a single officer, they also brought their brothers and soldiers with them as they walked towards the Mongol cavalry camp. "Stop them!" Xia Qian saw that the situation was about to turn bad and quickly shouted. At this moment, Kong He and the other 3 division commanders also looked over. They looked at Dai Qua, who was still riding on his horse calmly. Under everyone's gaze, Dai Qua slowly raised his right hand and said calmly, "Don't stop them. Their hearts are no longer with the 5-star army. They can still be of use to us. We have to respect their choice. If there are others who have the same thoughts, you can also walk over." Not only did he not stop them, he even supported them. This made everyone confused. Tang Sheng also saw Dai Qua's actions and laughed. He then said, "I didn't expect General Dai Qua to be such a reasonable person. However, I don't know if you have the same thoughts. You can come over as well. Don't worry, with this general here, I will ensure your wealth and glory." Tang Sheng was actually persuading Dai Qua to surrender. When Xia Qian heard this, he couldn't help but reach for the scimitar at his waist. He was even prepared to kill Dai Qua if Dai Qua really dared to do that. He would never allow anything to happen to the Far East Army that the commander had single-handedly created. Dai Qua also did not expect such a move. He noticed that there were roughly 3,000 people from the Far Eastern Army who had walked out and joined the Mongol army. Although there were still some people who looked hesitant, they didn't do anything out of line. These people could still be won over, so he thought it was time to stop. While Tang Shang was comforting him, he said, "Glory and wealth." "Haha, Tang Shang, are you joking with me?" Since Dai Qua had responded, Tang Shang was naturally delighted. He was afraid that the other party wouldn't say or do anything. If that happened, he wouldn't know where to start. But once the other party opened his mouth, his opportunity appeared. If there was a problem, there was nothing to be afraid of. All they had to do was solve it. Tang Sheng smiled and wanted to ask why there was no glory and wealth. But before he could speak, Dai Qua continued, "The Mongolians are so poor that they don't even have a uniform. The soldiers don't even have spare cavalry swords. They don't even bear to put salt in their food. Tell me, where did the glory and wealth come from?" The Mongolians were really poor. When they didn't know how to produce and couldn't rob others, their lives were actually very poor. The Mongolians that everyone saw killing cows and sheep were the modern Mongolians, not the old Mongolians. In the past, the Mongolians weren't good at producing. They only knew how to herd animals. If they wanted to eat a good meal, they had to wait until something happened to their animals or they died. Those were the animals that they relied on to survive. The males had to be kept and the females had to be prepared to give birth. How could they just casually eat them? It was because they were poor that they had to go around robbing. Dai Qua's question made Tang Shang's expression change. He didn't know how to answer. And this was just the beginning. Through the radio, Dai Qua knew and prepared much more than Tang Sheng. He looked at Tang Sheng with a contemptuous gaze and said, "The glory and wealth you told everyone about should be just a saying. You're trying to deceive everyone, right? But how wise am I? How could I be so easily fooled like these idiots?" As he spoke, Dai Qua pointed at the men who had just joined the Mongolian army from the Far Eastern Army. Being reprimanded, the traitors who had a guilty conscience naturally lowered their heads. There were also some people who looked at Tang Sheng. Evidently, they wanted to hear his explanation. They wanted to know if the glory and wealth he had mentioned was real or fake. Seeing these people staring at him, Tang Sheng felt his hair stand on end. He quickly waved his hands and explained, "Everyone, don't listen to his nonsense. He's just messing with our morale." "Messing with your morale? Haha, you think too highly of yourself. Do you think you're worthy of talking about morale? You're just a bunch of mobs. You'll go wherever there are benefits. You don't have any principles at all. You don't know what loyalty is. You don't deserve to be human.
Daiqua's voice was very loud as he shouted at Tang Shang and the soldiers who had just surrendered.
This shout made Tang Shang and the others feel a sense of panic.
In order to stabilize the morale of the army, he had to shout as loudly as well.
He's talking nonsense. The Mongolian army has now taken over Al City. Everyone has seen the wealth and prosperity there with their own eyes. Yes, yes.
Because of Tang Shang's words, the traitors who had been slightly shaken started to nod their heads again.
They then glared at Daiqua fiercely, as if saying, "You're talking nonsense, you're messing up our morale. Al City prosperous." Ha ha ha, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, Daiqua looked up to the sky and laughed. Although he was also a division commander in the Far Eastern Army, he had been traveling with Yang Chendong for a while and had conquered many territories. He had seen a lot and the prosperity of Al City was not worth mentioning in his eyes. Although he had not been to Chichen City, just the prosperity of the beginning city was many times better than Al City. After laughing for a while, Daiqua seemed to have finished expressing the laughter in his heart. Then he looked at Tang Shang and the others with disdain and said, "In your eyes, Al City might be very busy, but right now it is not in my eyes." Taking a step back, what does the prosperity of Al City have to do with you? Do you really think that the Mongolians will treat you as their own and give you benefits? Tang Sheng's face was a little ugly. Of course, he knew that the Mongolians were always on guard against him. In the past 3 months, he had felt it deeply in Al City. However, at this moment, when the armies were about to clash, he definitely could not admit it. Not only that, he had to praise the Mongolian army. Only then would he be able to raise their morale and obtain victory. After hesitating for a few breaths, Tang Sheng opened his mouth and said, "Why can't you give it to us? I might as well tell you that Hulahan has already agreed. In the future, Al City will belong to us. Other than our families, our people can also move in." What? Did the Mongolian Great Khan really say that? If that's the case, it's a great thing. In an instant, the Far Eastern Army soldiers started to mutter and discuss. Previously, because the city was too small and could not accommodate so many people, Chen Bo made the rule that other than soldiers, ordinary people could not enter the city. It was also because of this that it attracted all sorts of complaints and caused Tang Sheng to rebel. Tang Sheng also grasped this point, which was why his actions had gained the support of more soldiers. It was only because of his call that more than 3,000 soldiers joined his side. This was Tang Sheng's trump card. The reason why he was so confident that he could face the Far Eastern Army with just 10,000 cavalry was also because of this reason. Right now, everyone was discussing animatedly and the public opinion was obviously leaning towards his side. In order to stabilize the situation and also to speed up Daiqua's defeat, he intentionally looked at the Mongolian General Ulu and said, "If everyone doesn't believe me, you can go and ask General Ulu." Ulu had never heard that the Mongolian army wanted to take control of Al City with Tang Sheng. However, he was not stupid enough to deny all of this. He thought that as long as he won the battle, he could do whatever he wanted. He immediately laughed and said, "That's right, General Tang Sheng is right." The Great Khan did say that he was willing to take control of Al City with the brothers of the Far Eastern Army and share the world. "You're lying." Just as Wu Lu finished speaking and Tang Sheng's expression relaxed, Daiqua shouted loudly, "Stop it!" Daiqua shouted. He did not expect Tang Sheng to be so shameless. Furthermore, this Mongolian general was actually lying through his teeth. He had already received the telegram. The Mongolian army had already left Arching after looting the place. How could he say such a thing? Knowing that the other party was lying, Daiqua could not let him continue. After he interrupted the other party's words, he said loudly, "Everyone, don't listen to their nonsense. Truth be told, the Mongol army has already left Al City after a round of inhumane pillaging." Nonsense. Daiqua's words immediately caused Ulu and Tang Sheng to refute in unison. One of them was one of Hulahan's favorite generals, while the other was entrusted with an important task to deal with the Far Eastern Army. With such a status, how could he believe that Hu Lihan had already betrayed him? The two naturally did not believe it, but Daiqua, who had received the news, laughed and said, "I knew you wouldn't believe it, but don't worry, there will be evidence in front of you soon. Come on, release the signal." Chapter 1390. The so-called signal was a dazzling firework.
Although the effect was a little worse during the day, the loud noise and the scene of the explosion in the sky could still be clearly seen.
After the firework was released, rumbling sounds could be heard from the ground. At the same time, a Mongol cavalry scout quickly came to General Ulu's side. "General, we've discovered the enemy." About 4,000 enemy cavalry suddenly appeared behind us. They're flying the 5-star army's flag. An excellent scout would be able to quickly determine the number of enemies. Just from this point alone, this scout was qualified.
However, he only came to report after the rumbling sounds of the war horses.
It was too late, so he did not pass.
"Bastard, why did you only report back now?" Wu Lu cursed angrily and lashed out with his horsewhip at the scout.
The scout had a wronged expression on his face.
He wanted to say that the enemy cavalry was completely covered in green leaves and could not be seen unless they were right in front of them. But at this moment, he no longer had the chance to speak, because behind them, the bright 5-starred flag that could not be ignored was already in sight.
They had already arrived at the battlefield. When the scout came to report, the Mongol cavalry had already put up a basic resistance. However, when faced with the elite 1st Cavalry Army, how could these Mongol cavalry be a match for them? In just one charge, hundreds of corpses were thrown to the side. Just as they heard the sound of hooves, the 5-star army had already arrived in front of them. When they got closer, they could see that some of the war horses still had green leaves on them. Camouflage and infiltration was one of the training courses of the 5-star army. Furthermore, they already knew the location of the battle, so it was not difficult to enter the battlefield without being discovered. "Everyone listen to my orders, stop." Beta Persei's loud voice sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry immediately stopped. Their formation was neat and orderly, and it was obvious that they were well-trained elites.
They did not make a sound, and other than the snorting of the horses, there was no other sound.
They all waited for Beta Persei's next order. There was a kind of aura that made people admire him and fear him, not daring to look at him directly. For example, right now, there was a person who had such an aura. His chest was straighter than ever, and his footsteps were steady and sonorous. His gaze was clear and transparent, as if he could look straight into the depths of one's heart. In fact, whether it was a war or a fight between two people, the key to victory was one's mentality. When facing an enemy, he would have the absolute aura of a cat against a mouse. When he was the number one in the world, he would definitely crush his opponent. Then he would win.
Although there were only 4,000 cavalry under Xianxia's command, they gave off a feeling that they were an invincible army with thousands of men and horses.
They were both cavalry, but in comparison, the Mongol cavalry was much weaker. This could be seen from the shock on the Mongol soldiers' faces. Without comparison, there would be no harm. The 5-star army's military formation was neat, and they were all dressed in the same uniform. Their sabers were of the same length and size, and under the sunlight, they emitted waves of cold light. Even when he was riding on a horse, he was still riding horizontally and vertically, giving people a very shocking visual impression. The formation wasn't trained for nothing, and the effect was very obvious. Not only did it make the soldiers more self-disciplined, but it also made them better at following orders. Just their mental appearance alone gave people a lot of pressure. This. When more Mongol cavalrymen looked at the 5-star army and didn't know how to describe their feelings, Ulu opened his mouth. "Everyone, don't be afraid. They only have 4,000 people. As long as we charge forward, victory will belong to us. Let's see who dares." Beta Persei faced Ulu's shout, and after a loud shout, the 4,000 5-star army raised their sabers high, and a soul-shaking aura surged out. There were less than 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen left, and they were completely shocked by the aura of the 5-star army. At this moment, they found that they didn't have the courage to take a step forward. As the commander of the army, Ulu naturally saw everything. Because of this, he cleverly didn't take a step forward. Instead, he looked at Tang Shang and said, "General Tang, let's go together. As long as we can destroy these Han reinforcements, the main force of the Mongol cavalrymen will arrive soon. At that time, no one will be our opponent." Ulu wanted Tang Shang and the others to charge first, and then he could sit back and reap the benefits. In his eyes, even 10 Far Eastern Army soldiers weren't as important as a Mongol soldier. Tang Shang wasn't stupid. How could he not see Ulu's intention? However, he didn't dare to act rashly.
Putting aside the fact that he had already witnessed the might of the five-star army when he sent reinforcements to the first city, there were still more than 20,000 soldiers of the Far East army staring at him.
Under the shout, Tang Sheng didn't move. Beta Persei saw everything inside.
With his personality, since he had brought the army here, of course, he would kill to his heart's content.
What Mongol army? What Far East army? He had never placed them in his eyes. They were just a bunch of mobs.
As long as he wanted, the 4,000 warriors of the world's first cavalry army could kill all of them.
However, he couldn't do this.
Before he came, the young master had instructed that the construction of the Far East region needed people the most.
A large number of young people. The people in front of him were all strong laborers. They were indispensable talents to build the city and consolidate the territory. If he killed them, who would build the city and who would repair the roads? In order to complete the task given by young Chendong, it was impossible to kill a lot of people. However, he could still kill a chicken to show respect. He had to do it. Some people were like this. If you didn't kill them, they wouldn't know fear. However, before he took action, Beta Persei still needed to do something. This was very important to destroy the enemy's morale, establish the final victory, and even unify their hearts.
Come, bring them here.
Beta Persei didn't give the order to attack immediately. Instead, he shouted to bring people. Soon, the five-star army soldiers escorted 2 men to the battlefield. They arrived in front of the open space between the 2 camps.
Of the 2 people, one was a skinny man wearing a Mongol army uniform, and the other was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. Both of their faces were pale, and they were trembling with fear. As soon as the 2 of them were brought out, there were 2 loud shouts from the battlefield.
Tuo Bashir? Li Hui. The one called Tuo Bashir was the Mongol soldier. He had another identity, which was General Ulu's personal guard. Previously, he didn't follow the army out of the city because he wasn't feeling well. Instead, he stayed in All City. The one called Li Hui was Tang Sheng's clansman. When the Tang residence's treasures were stolen and his clansmen were killed, Li Hui wasn't in the residence, so he escaped death. These 2 people, because of their special identities, were targeted by Xianxia's intelligence personnel in All City. They were captured alive and sent out of the city. Last night, Yang Heir had already sent someone to pick up the 2 of them. What he wanted was to use their mouths to tell the truth. He wanted Ulu and Tang Sheng to see what kind of person the great Khan Hulahan, whom they served, was. Wu Lu and Tang Sheng were naturally the ones who shouted. It was just their instinct to shout out loud. In contrast, after the 2 people who were called saw their respective masters, their tears uncontrollably flowed out. When a person brushed past death and saw their loved ones, they would definitely reveal their true feelings. General, young clan leader, it's all gone, it's all gone. Tuo Bashir and Li Hui didn't wait for anyone to ask. With tears and snot, they recounted everything that had happened in Al City and what had happened to their family. After that, whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, when they heard that Hulahan had led his troops out of All City and fled to the Siberian region, it was as if they were struck by lightning. They stood in place, not moving at all. Although they did not know why the great Khan had retreated, one thing was for sure. They were all abandoned people, abandoned as pawns, thrown here. Ulu couldn't understand why his great Khan would abandon him. Tang Sheng's face was full of shame. He thought of how Belinsky persuaded him to send out troops. Belinsky wanted to abandon him, but at the same time, he also wanted to steal his treasures. When he thought of how he had mistakenly trusted Belinsky, and how he and Li Hui were the only 2 people left in the entire tribe, he couldn't help but scream, "Belinsky, you liar, you despicable, you bastard!" It was because Tang Sheng believed in Belinsky that he became a traitor to the Far Eastern army and came to this point. But what he got was betrayal and the destruction of his tribe. If he could do it all over again, Tang Sheng would not have made such a choice. Whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, they both had fierce looks in their eyes as they cursed everything that had happened to them. This scene was seen by the other officers and soldiers, and all of them fell into deep thought. This was especially so for the Far Eastern army that had defected with Tang Sheng. They thought that after joining their new master, they would be able to enjoy glory and wealth. At the very least, they would be able to ensure the safety of their tribesmen. But now, not only would they not be able to save their tribesmen, they would also not have a good ending. After all, traitors never had a good ending. The atmosphere of the battlefield changed drastically because of the appearance of Tuoba Shi and Li Hui. The most obvious change was that the Far East army that had surrendered had become restless and restless. Charge! With such a good opportunity, how could Beta Persei let it go?
With an order, the 4,000 five-star army cavalry behind him moved, raising their sabers and urging their horses forward.
The first to bear the brunt of this attack were the 2,000 Mongol cavalry. Their morale was already low, and Tuoba Shi's appearance had destroyed their hope. Just as their morale was at its lowest, the five-star army charged over. How could they stop them? Chapter 1391. When the arrow formation stabbed into the Mongol cavalry camp, the resistance they faced could be said to be minuscule. This allowed the attack of the 5-star Legion Corps to go really smoothly. With just one charge, they charged into the enemy formation, and no one could stop them.
Block them, block them.
Ulu, who finally came back to his senses, shouted at the army as he looked at Tang Shang and said, "General Tang, although we have been abandoned, we have to kill our way out for ourselves. Otherwise, what awaits us will be worse than death." How could Tang Shang not know?
He was a traitor, and from a certain point of view, he was far more hateful than the enemy.
Once he was caught by the 5-star army, he would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Tang Shang did not want to die and could not die. He still wanted to take revenge on Belinsky.
He immediately waved his sword and shouted to his troops, "Everyone, follow me and kill our way out.
Let's find Hulahan and take revenge." With a loud shout, Tang Shang was the first to gallop out of the camp. The group of personal guards beside him also followed suit. However, that was it. Including the soldiers, there were only 20 or so cavalry. As for the others, including Qi Wu, Zhang Shi, and Li Dai, they all stood in place and did not move at all. The soldiers behind them also followed beside their general. They also had no intention of charging out of the battle. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrived and Hulahan fled without saying anything, it was clear that the situation was over. Anyone with a brain would not make the decision to become enemies with the 5-star army. Other than the 20 or so soldiers, there was actually no one following them. Tang Shang's face revealed a trace of loneliness. However, he did not blame these people. They had already followed him down the wrong path. He could not drag them to their deaths. "Come, follow me and kill our way out." Kill. Tang Shang was determined to fight to the death. He was the first to charge towards the 5-star army. He knew very well what he had done. Even if he surrendered now, he would not benefit at all. Since that was the case, he might as well take the risk. If he could really break out, he would definitely find a way to find Belinsky and take revenge for the extermination of his clan. Surround them all, don't let a single one escape. Beta Persei was riding on a big, strong horse, his face full of excitement. After following Yang Chendong for so many years, there were fewer and fewer opportunities for him to take action, let alone the opportunity to lead an army alone. It wasn't easy for him to let go of everything and go on a killing spree. He would cherish it very much. "Come, don't waste any more time. Both of you, come at me together." Beta Persei laughed heartily as he casually pointed his broadsword at Ulu and Tang Shang. It was as if he was looking down on the world. Attack together. After Ulu and Tang Shang exchanged a look, they nodded in unison. Then, they whipped their horses and charged towards Beta Persei. This was their only chance. With 2 against 1, their chances of winning were still very high. As long as they could capture this general, they would be able to force their way out of the encirclement. Wu Luaning had become a general among the many Mongolian cavalry. His own ability was naturally unquestionable. There was no culture at all, and one could not rely on qualifications and other resources. Those who could become generals were undoubtedly extremely capable. Tang Shang was the same. To be able to stand out among so many people and be appointed as a teacher, his own combat strength must be very strong. Both of them were like this. Together, they could be considered a strong combination. If they only fought one person, their chances of winning were quite high. At least in the Far Eastern Army, Chen Bo, including the army commander, would not be a match for him. But who was Beta Persei? He was one of the 5 members of the Yang Chendong family. He had been by Yang Chendong's side all year round. Apart from being different from the rest,
His own combat strength was also constantly improving. If his strength was too weak, he would not have the face to stay by Yang Chendong's side. Not to mention other things, if there was really danger, who would protect who? It was not an exaggeration to say that in the entire Xianxia, the entire 5-star army, Beta Persei was not ranked number 1 in terms of leading troops to war. He also did not have much experience, but if it was a one-on-one battle, then there were really not many people who could be his opponent. With Yang Chendong's personal guidance and the Black Knights and Dragon Guards feeding him moves every day, he was not afraid at all even if it was just 1 versus 2. He pulled out the divine sword from his waist. When he was fighting 2 people by himself, Beta Persei not only did not take a defensive position, but also took the initiative to launch an attack. He would not forget what Yang Chendong had said, that offense was the best defense. Relying on the strength of the divine sword in his hand, Beta Persei was full of confidence as he pulled his horse forward. The 3 generals immediately fought together. Under the gaze of many Far Eastern army soldiers, the wind from their swords collided and the blades struck each other. The 3 of them were almost all fighting openly, without the slightest bit of hypocrisy. It was completely a competition of strength and technique. This kind of battle also took into account one's own physique. If one's strength was not enough, one might show signs of defeat after just 1 blow. If one showed a flaw, it would often cost one's life. In a battle of life and death, a little negligence and a trace of insufficient strength could lead to the loss of one's life. As generals, the 3 of them naturally understood this principle. Therefore, when they attacked, they used all their strength. It was a fight to the death. Ding ding dang. The divine sword in Beta Persei's hand collided twice in a very short period of time, colliding with the divine sword in the hands of Ulu and Tang Shang respectively. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. In this first exchange, the 3 of them had a preliminary impression of each other at the same time, especially Ulu and Tang Shang, who felt the numbness in their arms after the first blow. Their faces had become a little nervous. They could feel that if they were to rely on strength alone, they would not be Beta Persei's opponent. Beta Persei belonged to the group of people with extraordinary strength. In addition, he was by Yang Chendong's side every day, eating and drinking well, and his strength was constantly increasing. In terms of strength alone, even the talented black cavalry was no match for him. Only the abnormal Yang Chendong could suppress him. It was this confidence that made Beta Persei so confident when he was fighting against 2 people by himself. And after using his sword to fight against 2 people in a row, this confidence swelled even more. Haha, great. Beta Persei also felt a slight tremor in his arm. He laughed and turned around to attack. He had no intention of resting. It was a competition of strength, and he would not stop until he was dead. This person is so strong. Take my spear. After Tang Shang felt the tremendous pressure from the sword, he knew that if this continued, perhaps before he could do anything to his opponent, his arm would become red and swollen, and he would not be able to exert any strength. He simply put away his sword and changed to a spear. He swapped the red Sakura spear hanging next to his horse. The reason why the cavalry mainly used the divine sword was because it was light and flexible. For example, the cavalry required fast speed, fast attack, and fast deployment. All of these had strict requirements for weapons. It was not that they could not use a spear. In history, there were cavalry who used heavy and powerful hammers as weapons. It was just that using such a weapon would inevitably affect their speed and flexibility in combat. As a result, most people used the divine sword. However, those who could use a spear were all people who believed themselves to be strong enough to use it. Otherwise, wouldn't they be giving up on flexibility and speed? Wouldn't they be courting death? Tang Shang changed to a spear, which was enough to prove his confidence in himself and his satisfaction with his physical fitness. He wanted to use his strength to suppress Beta Persei, and then find a favorable opportunity for Ulu to attack. With the spear in his hand, Tang Shang felt as if he was the king of the world. With a loud shout, Tang Shang's chi sank into his dantian. Borrowing the power of the spear, he swung the spear at Yang Air. The spear swept through the air, causing a weak explosion. Good. Beta Persei, who was rushing over, also laughed. He did not have the slightest idea of retreating because his opponent had changed his weapon. On the contrary, his fighting spirit was even more abundant. He was afraid that his opponent would not use his full strength. Just like when he was sparring with the Black Cavalry, Everyone was afraid of accidentally injuring each other, so naturally, they would have a backup plan. It was not like this kind of life and death battle, where it was either you die or I die. There was no need to worry so much. Only then could a fight be called carefree. With a smile still on his face, Beta Persei had already urged his horse to come in front of Tang Xiang. His sword and spear collided several times in a very short period of time. There was a continuous sound of clashing, and because they were all so fast, it made the onlookers feel dazzled. With the length of the spear, Tang Xiang was able to restrain Beta Persei's attack for a while, keeping him at a distance of 10 feet. He was temporarily out of danger. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ulu attacked. He took advantage of the spear entangling the divine sword to launch a sneak attack and harass Beta Persei from the side. He did not expect to be able to hurt Beta Persei. As long as he could distract him, it was equivalent to creating an opportunity for Tang Xiang. Although it was the first time the two of them worked together, there were few flaws between them. Perhaps they also knew that this was a life and death battle, and it would be very dangerous if they did not use their full strength. So when they attacked, they used all their strength and displayed their strongest attacks and methods. Entangled by the spear and harassed by the dagger, Beta Persei fell into a passive situation. Several times, he revealed some small flaws. Perhaps it was because he was strong enough that the dagger shook off his opponent's weapon several times, but he was afraid that he would have been injured by now. If it were someone else in this position, they would probably have to call for help. After all, the 5-star army had the advantage in terms of strength. And because of the bravery and strength of the warriors, nearly 2,000 Mongolian cavalry had been disrupted and were in the middle of being surrounded. It seemed that victory was already in sight. As such, there were hundreds of 5-star army cavalry around the 3-man group battle. They were here to prevent Ulu and Tang Xiang from escaping, and they were also prepared to support Beta Persei at any time. Chapter 1392. As long as Beta Persei shouted and retreated, the 5-star army cavalry watching from the sidelines would swarm forward. At that time, it would not be 2 against 1, but dozens of people against 1. But Beta Persei did not complain, nor did he have the slightest intention of backing down. His identity did not allow him to back down, and the celestial sword in his hand was where his confidence lay. He had already clashed with his opponent's weapon for more than a dozen rounds. The weapons in the hands of these two generals were not ordinary iron, at least much tougher than ordinary iron. But there was a limit to how strong they were. In the face of the celestial sword made with the highest forging technology in the world, it was only a matter of time before they broke. And once the opponent's weapon broke from the middle, it would be time for Beta Persei to launch a counterattack. Now he only needed to maintain enough physical strength and rely on his arm strength to not let the opponent hurt him. The 3 weapons were still clashing, and stars would appear from time to time, indicating that the 3 of them seemed to have used all their strength in each attack, and each attack was extremely dangerous. In this way, the 3 of them continued to attack for another 5 rounds. Beta Persei's eyes shone brightly when he saw that there was a large gap on the opponent's weapon. He knew that the celestial sword had finally taken advantage of his advantage. The opponent's weapon would break at any time, and his opportunity to counterattack had appeared. The time had come. Beta Persei suddenly shouted, and the strength in his arm increased by a bit, so much so that it reached 90% of his overall strength. He slashed the celestial sword at the body of the spear. Under the great force, Tang Xiang felt his arm tighten. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Fortunately, he managed to control himself at the last moment. When he looked up, he saw that Beta Persei had given up on him and was slashing his sword at Ulu. Good chance. Tang Xiang's eyes lit up. Then he gripped the spear tightly and thrust it forward. He only needed 2 breaths to stab the spearhead into Beta Persei's armor, severely injuring his opponent and capturing the most important hostage. Beta Persei seemed to treat Tang Xiang as an invisible person. At this time, he was slashing his saber at Ulu's body, looking like he was going to fight to the end. Ulu could tell that Beta Persei was going all out. Logically speaking, he should have urged his horse to retreat and avoid the brunt of Beta Persei's attack. For someone like him who grew up on horseback, he did not need to exert any force on the reins when advancing or retreating with his horse. He only needed to gently press his legs together to communicate with his horse and retreat in the face of battle. However, Ulu did not retreat.
He needed to create favorable conditions and enough time for Tang Xiang to attack. This made it necessary for him to block a few slashes from the saber. Wu Lu was confident that he would be able to block 3 or 4 attacks within 2 breaths of time, rather than holding the saber with one hand. There was no problem with his strength. Ulu was confident about this. However, the problem was that his weapon could not do it. When faced with the divine cavalry saber that could cut through iron like mud, Wu Lu's cavalry saber had already been chipped. It was only because he had been fighting hard that he did not notice it. Ulu did not expect that his weapon, which had always been very tough, would be broken in half. Therefore, he still followed his previous fighting style, placing the saber on his body and defending himself. 1 hit, 2 hits. When the 3rd hit came, Beta Persei's saber slashed at the gap in Ulu's saber. Then, with a crisp breaking sound, the saber broke into 2 pieces. The sudden change caught Ulu off guard. Before he could react, the divine saber had already landed on Ulu's body. The sharp edge of the saber directly broke his bones. With just 1 blow, Ulu was cut into 2 halves. Blood splattered out as Uru's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell from his horse. Even as he died, he still could not understand how his weapon could suddenly break in half. Could it be that this Han general knew some kind of magic? Ulu was dead. He was cut in half and died in an extremely miserable manner. Blood also splashed on Beta Persei, but for Beta Persei, who had been on countless battlefields and killed countless enemies, he did not care at all. As if he had done an extremely simple thing, he turned around and prepared to deal with another enemy, Tang Xiang. It was also at this moment that he felt something poke his body. It did not hurt, so he immediately turned around to look. Beta Persei turned around and looked at the spot where he was stabbed. He saw a broken spearhead, Tang Xiang who was holding the spear, and the other party's frightened eyes. Just now, Beta Persei had used up 2 breaths of time to kill Ulu, which created enough opportunity for Tang Xiang. Next, he unceremoniously raised his spear and stabbed, with a victorious smile on his face. It was not until the spear stabbed out that his expression suddenly changed. He did not feel the tip of the spear entering his body, but only the feeling of the blade piercing into a hard boulder, unable to move forward. At the same time, Tang Xiang's gaze quickly turned to the tip of the spear. At some point, the tip of the spear had been broken, leaving only a wooden handle. At this time, the wooden handle was stabbed towards Beta Persei, and it hit the other party's exquisite armor. Beta Persei, who had been by Yang Chendong's side all year round, could be said to be a treasure from head to toe. Just like the armor he was wearing, it was thin and extremely hard. Xianxia's munitions factory spent a lot of effort to make it. Such armor was also very rare in the entire 5-star army. With Beta Persei's status, it was naturally not a problem for him to get one. The spear was stabbed into the armor, unable to move forward. Tang Xiang was still in the same position, his face full of surprise and confusion. Humph! Seeing that Tang Xiang's spear had stabbed into his armor, Beta Persei's face was full of anger. Originally, Tang Xiang had betrayed the 5-star army, Xianxia, and the young master, causing him to want to kill him. Now that Tang Xiang even wanted to kill him, this person could not be left alive. Beta Persei, who had already killed Ulu, gently turned around and easily moved the spear to the side. Then, the celestial saber slashed through the air and slashed towards Tang Xiang's neck. War has always been cruel. Either you die or I die. Beta Persei was furious. The saber was as fast as lightning. When Tang Xiang came back to his senses, he had only just raised the spear when the wooden spear was cut in half. The saber did not continue to fall and fell on Tang Xiang's neck, then quickly slashed. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and Tang Xiang's eyes gradually became blurred. At this time, he seemed to have seen the scene of him growing up with the help of the tribe when he was young. He also seemed to have seen the scene of him joining the Far Eastern Army and eating his first full meal. Then, he rose step by step and finally became a division commander. Then, his ambition began to grow, and his heart became unsatisfied until he did the wrong thing of betraying the Far Eastern Army. Tang Xiang was dead. Even when he died, his eyes were wide open, and he looked like he could not die in peace. No one knew what he was thinking before he died, and no one knew if he would regret his wrong actions and thoughts. With Tang Xiang's death, the soldiers he brought with him immediately became obedient. Especially the more than 3,000 soldiers who had just chosen to surrender to him, their faces were full of regret. If they had known that this would be the result, why did they stand out? Weren't they courting death? Nearly 2,000 Mongolian soldiers. Half were killed and the other half were captured. More than 10,000 rebels from the Far Eastern Army were surrounded by Division Commander Dai Qua and 20,000 soldiers, and all of them chose to put down their weapons and surrender. Even Ulu and Tang Shang were not a match for them. Unless they did not want to live, who would dare to raise their swords against them? The rebellion was thus quelled. But the matter was not over. How to stabilize the people's hearts and win them over was an important task for Yang Chendong after arriving in the Far Eastern province. After 3 months of chaos in Arching, Yang Chendong arrived. Along with him were thousands of 5-star army's elite cavalry, thousands of Mongolian captives, and thousands of ordinary Russian tribesmen. When Yang Chendong led the army into Al City, whose city walls weren't very tall, all he saw was a mess on the streets and chaos on the ground. On the streets, he could see the corpses of ordinary people lying on the ground. There were old people, women, and children. Many of them had been conquered by the 5-star army. They were the people who had come to support the Far Eastern province, but they did not expect to die in such a chaotic situation. Along the way, Yang Chendong's expression became uglier and uglier. These were his people, and they had actually died in the city. He had to take revenge for Hulahan. Fortunately, after inspecting the corpses, he discovered that there were very few Han people. Later on, Yang Chendong understood the situation in the city. When the Mongolian soldiers killed and looted, the few Han people in the city chose to hide. They threw away all their money in order to save their lives. These Han people persevered. As long as they were still alive, everything would still be there. Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely bring them a better life. In order to survive, after the Mongol soldiers left, some of the criminals in the city started to pillage and kill. These Han Chinese once again chose to band together. They picked up their weapons and became a force to be reckoned with. As long as they did not take the initiative to find trouble with others, no one would find trouble with them. This was how they managed to survive until Yang Chendong's arrival. As Yang Chendong entered the city, the law and order in the city quickly stabilized. On the streets, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army were patrolling the streets. They were dressed in neat military uniforms, riding on tall horses, and wielding divine weapons in their hands. Whenever they discovered someone doing something illegal on the streets, they would immediately lash out with their horsewhips and capture them. There was no room for discussion. Chapter 1393. The impartiality of the 5-star army's soldiers shocked some of the rebels and made them more obedient. However, there were still some daring people who took advantage of the fact that the 5-star army's numbers were not high. They gathered their forces and attacked the patrolling soldiers of the 5-star army. They attacked with dozens of people and even hundreds of people. These people were mostly white-skinned Russians. They took a liking to the soldiers' uniforms and sharp sabers, as well as the sturdy war horses they were riding. Facing the provocation and the rebels who were shouting and holding weapons such as sabers, sticks, clubs, and even hoes, the 5-star army did not hold back and killed them all. Since they dared to provoke the army, these people had already lost their humanity and deserved to die. Dozens of people or even hundreds of people could not even hold up against the charge of the world's #1 cavalry army and suffered heavy casualties. The formation was in chaos and they scattered in all directions. Those who could not escape became members of the prison. In just a single afternoon, the prison of the Far Eastern Army was filled with people. Some of the people who were caught later could only be tied up in the square outside the prison. Fortunately, it was already the 5th month and the weather was not too cold. They would not freeze to death. In troubled times, severe punishments were needed. When Yang Chendong heard the report that there were rebels in the city, he did not restrict the actions of the 5-star army soldiers. On the contrary, he supported them. He knew that one could not be merciful on the battlefield. Otherwise, one would be asking for trouble. There were some people that couldn't be reasoned with. Only continuous slaughter would make them realize their mistakes and realize the power of the 5-star army. Thus, they had no choice but to restrain themselves and become honest. While they were clearing out the unstable elements in all city and had no choice but to kill, Tianhu's 4,000 cavalrymen successfully intercepted Hulahan's troops who were escaping to the west. After a round of fighting, Hulahan brought 12,000 Mongol cavalrymen and escaped. On the other hand, Belinsky,
who had too many items and could not bear to throw them away, was captured on the spot. He had personally witnessed the strength of the 5-star army. When he saw the strength of the 5-star army, the Mongol soldiers panicked and ran away with twisted faces. He saw that iron sabers and wooden spears were thrown all over the ground. The various items that they had snatched had also become burdens. They had all been abandoned in order to increase their speed. The army was defeated like a landslide. Countless Mongol cavalrymen, who were known as the strongest army, fled like sheep seeing wolves. They all exposed their backs to the 5-star army and were chased by the world's #1 cavalry army. They did not have any intention of resisting. This kind of strength only the Mongol cavalrymen and some Mongol tribes did not belong to the Mongol army. Unexpectedly, there was always someone stronger. The 5-star army was actually so ferocious that the Mongol cavalrymen could not fight back at all. Belinsky was captured, but he was not depressed. On the contrary, he felt that this was an opportunity for him. Since the Mongol cavalrymen could not defeat the 5-star army, why would he not join the strong? With such a powerful cavalry as his backing, he would not have to be afraid of anyone when he went out to do business. With this beautiful thought in mind, Belinsky stopped the resistance of the guards of the caravan. They obediently surrendered their weapons. Belinsky also reported his identity. At the same time, he put forward his request. He wanted to see the highest general of the 5-star army here. He had some information to report. Tian, who saw that Belinsky seemed like someone important. He also thought about how his teacher had just arrived and needed to understand the situation here through various channels. He also needed various people to help him complete his mission. As such, he nodded and agreed. He did not even use a rope to tie Belinsky up. He gave him a very relaxed environment and allowed him to come to arching with him. This also strengthened Belinsky's confidence. He believed that with his own abilities, he would be able to achieve great things. As for the fact that he had tricked the Far Eastern army, that was nothing. Wasn't it like this during times of war? Today, we can drink and chat happily, but tomorrow we might fight. On the other hand, today, we might be enemies, but tomorrow we might be friends. To sum it up, there was no such thing as an eternal friend, only eternal benefits. Because of the 5-star army's ruthless methods, arching went from chaos to peace. Then, when the Far Eastern army that had disappeared for 3 months suddenly appeared in the city, the security in the city became as good as before. As a large number of troops entered the city, some criminals who had not given up on making a fortune in the chaos had no choice but to put away their crooked thoughts. At this moment, it could be said that arching had returned to Xianxia's embrace. Chen Bo's condition gradually stabilized. After the army entered the city, he went straight to the city lord's mansion where Yang Chendong lived. When he saw Yang Chendong, who had taken off his golden cloak and changed into a loose green robe, Chen Bo knelt on the ground with a plop. "Young master, I've made a mistake. I've failed to live up to your expectations. Get up quickly." Under Yang Chendong's gaze, Beta Persei, who came to report with him, quickly helped Chen Bo up. "You haven't recovered yet. You still have to take care of your body. Have a seat." Yang Chendong asked with concern. Although the arching incident was lost because of Tang Sheng's rebellion, Chen Bo, who was both the commander and the governor, also had an unshirkable leadership responsibility, as well as the responsibility of not knowing what was right and what was wrong. Of course, one of the fuses that caused the incident was the mistake in his strategy of governing the city. Why did Tang Sheng rebel? Wasn't it because his people were not allowed to enter the city? This policy was set by Chen Bo. On the other hand, even if Tang Sheng didn't rebel this time, as time passed, more and more problems would accumulate, and when the contradiction became bigger and bigger, things would still happen. This was equivalent to a pustule in a person's body. If it was left alone, it would get bigger and bigger. It was better to squeeze it out and make it healthier. Chen Bo, who was sitting in the chair, had a guilty look on his face. In the past few years, the Far Eastern province had received a lot of supplies from Xianxia. In comparison, although there were some achievements, they were not very big. The rebellion this time was equivalent to erasing all of the previous achievements. He was even prepared to be removed from his position, or even convicted. Even though Chen Bo was sitting on a chair, he still lowered his head as if he was in the wrong. Seeing this, Yang Chendong shook his head and said, "Chen Bo, you can be considered an old man who has been following me for a long time.
Back then, when you and Wuxian cooperated, you had such great chemistry. No matter what mission was given to you, you could complete it very well. This young master also has high hopes for you. Wu Shang was sent to the Golden Horde for several years. He has successfully established a cooperative relationship with some important figures in the Russian tribe and built his own new Xia city. His actions are gratifying. As for you, this young master also has high hopes for you. I gave you the power of the governor and the commander of the Far Eastern province. You have done well, so you don't have to worry that this young master will punish you. You are innocent. In order to dispel Chen Bo's worries and psychological burdens, Yang Chendong directly settled the matter. After saying that he was innocent, even if someone wanted to impeach or blame Chen Bo, it would be useless. Yang Chendong's words were like nails on a board. In Chen Bo's ears, he was very excited. Thank you, sixth young master, for your affirmation of my work. But Tang Shang was promoted by me. If something happens to him, I am guilty. I ask that I resign from the position of commander of the Far Eastern Army. Sixth young master, please accept my resignation. Looking at Chen Bo's stubbornness, Yang Chendong was angry and said, this young master said that you are innocent. If you are guilty, you are just not open-minded enough. It's just a mistake caused by inexperience. It's nothing. No. The rebellion has happened. Someone has to stand up and take responsibility. This subordinate is willing to resign from the position of commander. Chen Bo's second resignation showed his determination. Meritorious service should be rewarded. Mistakes should be punished. The matter of the Far Eastern province was not a small matter. Who knew how many people were watching? If there was no explanation, then the law would be in chaos. Yang Chendong said, good. Since it's like this, then you will be relieved of your position as commander of the Far Eastern Army. You should focus on your work as the governor. Thank you, sixth young master. Chen Bo, who got what he wanted, quickly cupped his fists in gratitude. He did not want to break the rules because of himself. With Yang Chendong's guarantee, no one would find trouble with him. However, there was no guarantee that no one would find trouble with the sixth young master. As far as he knew, there were many people in Crimson City who dared to speak up. Now that he was relieved of his position as commander of the Far Eastern Army, it was the same as giving everyone an explanation. He could also focus on his work as the governor. After staying here for a few years, in the beginning, he had some complaints about being transferred to this godforsaken place. But over the years, he had watched Al City grow from nothing, and he had developed feelings for it. If he were to transfer him away now, he would be reluctant to do so. More importantly, Yang Chendong came here. With his ability to turn something rotten into something magical, he would have a bright future in the Far Eastern province. He really wanted to follow the sixth young master and do a good job. After being relieved of his position as commander, Chen Bo seemed to be a lot more relaxed in an instant. When he talked about work, his state of mind was a lot more energetic than before. Sixth young master, although Tang Sheng's selfishness caused the mutiny this time, the fact that so many people were willing to follow him to rebel against the Far Eastern Army is enough to show that our work is not up to par. The main thing is that Al City is still too small. Arranging for 500,000 people from all over the place is already a lot of pressure. We really can't arrange for other soldiers' clansmen, even for senior officers like division commanders. Some openings cannot be opened. Chapter 1394. Yang Chendong stood at the side and listened attentively. From time to time, he would nod his head to show that he understood Chen Bo's previous actions. When the other party was almost done, he asked, previously, I asked the Far Eastern Army to reclaim the wasteland. How is it going? Speaking of wasteland, Chen Bo immediately perked up. Sixth young master, according to your instructions, this is what we've been doing during this period of time. With the efforts of 500,000 people, we've reclaimed a total of 20 million mu of land in the past 5 years. The land here is really fertile. Although it's affected by the weather and can't be compared to the south of the Great Ming Dynasty where we can harvest twice or even thrice a year, the yield of crops here is very high and the taste of the crops is also very fragrant. The Far Eastern region had black soil and was very suitable for planting crops. Just like in the future, the 3 eastern provinces became the base for producing crops because of this reason.
Hearing that 20 million mu of land had already been reclaimed, Yang Chendong nodded heavily. Not bad, your work is still very effective. Finally being praised, Chen Bo's expression became a little better. At least he wasn't completely useless. At least he didn't let down the work he had done for the past few years. Right, this time, the Mongolian cavalry suddenly appeared. Has the food been hidden properly? Yang Chendong suddenly thought of a very important question. Next, he wanted to develop the Far Eastern region. This wasn't just because of the bet he made with Yu Mian. Most importantly, this was an important chess piece for him to enter Europe through the land route. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Therefore, he decided to personally set up the troops here to establish a solid bridge to enter Europe. It's all hidden. Only the commanders and I of the Guard Regiment know the location. Even the other commanders don't know. You know that the soldiers of the Guard Regiment are all Han Chinese. Most of them are youths from Crimson City. Some of them are from the Cold Front. They are all trustworthy. This time, the food is intact. This is enough to prove everything. Good, this matter is well done. If one wanted to develop a place, they had to solve the problem of their stomachs first. If one couldn't even fill their stomachs, how could they talk about development? How about this, take out all the food. Next, whether it is building a city or repairing roads, we will need a lot of able-bodied men, and able-bodied men can eat the most. Hearing that the food was fine, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time he felt more confident. Build a city? Chen Bo was stunned. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. That's right. If we want to develop the Far Eastern region, just one Al city isn't enough. These 2 days, I also looked at the terrain here. Although the city can still be expanded, it's very limited due to geographical reasons. Since that's the case, it's better to build a few more cities. Only in this way can we arrange more people in the city and solve the worries of the soldiers. Only with a unified mindset can we be motivated and quickly develop the Far Eastern region so that this place can finally reach a state of self-sufficiency. After saying this, Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, Chen Bo, the importance of the Far Eastern region is far more important than you think. In the future, this place will become an important strategic location like Bieni City. In the future, if we expand from here to the west, it's definitely impossible to rely on external logistical support. Therefore, building a strong logistical foundation here is the most important thing right now. It can be said that the prosperity of the Far Eastern region is directly related to how big the blades of the 5-star army can expand in the future. Hearing that the Far Eastern region was so important, Chen Bo was shocked. He originally thought that Yang Chendong had his eyes on this place because it was sparsely populated and could become a new granary for Xianxia. Therefore, he put all his focus on reclaiming wastelands. But now, after hearing this idea, he realized that his vision was still too limited and his thinking was too petty. Yang Chendong saw Chen Bo's shocked expression and understood. He sighed again and said, calculating the time, Wu Shang has been in the Golden Horde for 7 years. The reason why he hasn't been transferred back is to wait for the right time to let him, this chess piece, display his greatest power. And if we only manage the territory in the Far East, then wouldn't his efforts over the past few years have been in vain? I see. Chen Bo finally understood that the construction and development of the Far Eastern region wasn't done on a whim by the 6th young master. It was planned as early as 7 years ago, or even earlier. Yang Chendong felt that there were some things that could be said more seriously today, so he looked at Chen Bo and asked with a serious expression, Chen Bo, the 5-star army's territory is already big enough, so why are we still expanding? I'm sure the people below must have a lot of opinions about this. This. Chen Bo didn't want to talk at first, but looking at Yang Chendong's serious expression, he could only bite the bullet and say, the people below have some opinions. But it's not the majority. There are still more people who like to work with the 6th young master. Especially some young people, they still want to build military achievements and are afraid that there won't be any more wars to fight. Wouldn't their years of training be useless in the end? Hee hee. Yang Chendong laughed when he heard Chen Bo's explanation. Young people wanted to build their careers, so they naturally wanted to participate in wars. Only then would they have a chance. But other than them, there were probably more people who didn't want to continue fighting. After all, peace was what everyone wanted. Other than a few extreme people,
No one wanted war to happen. If it was possible, why would Yang Chendong want to start a war? He wanted to be with his wife and children, and it would be great to have a family reunion. But reality didn't allow him to do so. This was because he wasn't sure how long Xianxia could maintain her glory. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was the center of the world. Other than the land of the Great Ming Dynasty, the other places were just barren lands. The things of the Great Ming Dynasty were the best, and the people of the Great Ming Dynasty were the most advanced race. Then, the two opium wars completely woke the Chinese people up. It turned out that we weren't the most advanced. It turned out that the Europeans had almost robbed the whole world. It turned out that we were already far behind. Then what were we doing? Didn't we know? We knew. Since the Tang Dynasty, China had been the center of the world. During the Song Dynasty, the southeast coast was full of Arab merchant ships. At that time, the Song Dynasty had begun to transform from a primitive natural economy to a market economy. It was even more so during the Zhou Ming Dynasty. When Jianghu went to the Western Ocean, who didn't admire him? Many countries were proud to be able to pay tribute to the Great Ming Dynasty. But that was it. When the Great Ming Dynasty entered the Yingzong Dynasty, it was equivalent to entering the middle of the Ming Dynasty. After that, it was a downward slope. In the end, it was covered by history and was ruled by a group of Tatars who only had millions of people. How sad it was to think about it. If Yang Chendong stopped now, he couldn't guarantee that his descendants wouldn't be destroyed one day, and they wouldn't be ruled by other foreign races. In order for that day to not appear, he had to work harder now. For example, when the world was unified and the Han people became the rulers, even if his descendants failed to live up to expectations and lost the world, the people who could replace them would definitely be Han people. It could be considered as meat rotting in a pot. Not many people could understand his thoughts because they had never experienced it before, so they couldn't think of it. Yang Chendong was different. History had already told him everything. When he was young, he had thought that if one day he had the ability, he would definitely let those foreign races know that the nobility of the Han people was not to be blasphemed. He would also not forgive those people for their actions. He could not forgive the foreign races for invading China when it was declining. He could not forgive the tolerance of China for being used as an opportunity for them to make a comeback. He couldn't forgive them for leaving behind a mess every time they came and left. He could not forgive their betrayal, their despicable actions that were worse than pigs and dogs. As early as the era of Confucius, Zhou Wanghan was forced to the brink of destruction by the warhounds. The western capital Chang'an fell and King Ping moved the capital to Luoyang, barely surviving the crisis. It was in that year that countless Chinese women were humiliated by the barbarians. Their blood was stained with tears and their corpses were a warning to us, warning us not to be merciful to the foreign races. The results of the Spring and Autumn War, taking advantage of the internal divisions of China, the Xiongnu flourished and led the barbarians to invade China. They burned, killed, and plundered, committing all kinds of crimes. This blood debt had been settled for many years, so it was time to settle it. And this settlement work would be completed by him. As for those who said that he was militaristic, that he killed people like scything flax, that he ostracized the foreign races, that he didn't have the magnanimity of a large country, that he didn't have a broad mind, that was up to them. Yang Chendong had his own principles, and now that he had the ability, he had to do everything he wanted to do. He had to do it to the best of his ability, to the extreme. Chen Bo left in the end. He was removed from his position as the commander of the Far Eastern Army, but there was no bitterness on his face. On the contrary, he was excited by Yang Chendong's words about developing the Far Eastern region, because this proved that his time had come. 2 days later, Tianhu won the battle and brought the captive Mongolian cavalry and Belinsky's caravan to Al City. Chen Bo knew about Belinsky. This person had a good head for business and his business was very big. In the past Al City, he could be considered one of the top merchants. Of course, he would not forget that it was this person who instigated the 4th Division's commander, Tang Shang, to attack the Far Eastern Army. Now that he heard that this person had been captured, he quickly went to find Yang Chendong. He wanted this person to die and take revenge for the thousands of soldiers who had sacrificed themselves. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.